Hey, friends. Welcome to Dishing on Divorce, Tuesday edition on WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio, Podcasts, and TV. I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. I'm also a divorced mom of 3 now grown kids, a recovering lawyer, Jewish educator and spiritual counselor, and a divorce coach who's committed to transforming the divorce experience for everyone involved. Let's face it, divorce finances are scary. For many people facing divorce, they fear being destitute. Maybe they've been in a financially abusive relationship and imagine they have no options because they had no control, no access. Many non-moneyed spouses, as the non-earners are called, have had no experience managing their own money for years. And the task of collecting data, that alone can be so terrifying. Today's guest is an expert at supporting people through that process. The title of our show is Yes, You Can Have Financial Security After Divorce. Our guest today is Larry Smith. He's the practice leader at Divorce Outcomes. He calls himself a marital divorce expert and tactical problem solver, which I love. And he identifies his roles as planner, manager, investigator, architect, strategist, communicator, and drafter. He's known for his unwavering ethics, passion for high-quality work, and high attention to detail. And he's been supporting people going through divorce for over 20 years. His expertise goes to what lies beyond the emotions and beyond the numbers, because personal relationships matter to him. That's what it's all about. Building trusted relationships with clients who need to find someone to trust. And that's why I invited him to join us today. Welcome, Larry, to Dishing on Divorce.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure to have you. So let's start with the question I start with all my clients. What led you to this? What's your story?
I was doing a lot of tax work for years, and I realized I had another. Actually, I was doing. I left. I used to work for Arthur Anderson, and when that collapsed in the early 2000s, if you will, I went on my own, and I started doing M&A advisory. And I find I enjoyed the buy side better than the sell side. And then I was invited to my first divorce process in 2002-3 timeframe. And I got hooked as a passion. I thought at that time, with all my skills I had in financial work, I said, I can do this. But I thought there would be a whole roadmap and frameworks and everything that existed. And there wasn't. It was just it was an empty shell, if you will. And the process I discovered over time that wasn't really a clear sequence. I'm a process expert by definition too. And so I got kind of taken by this, and I thought I can really help people, and I have. A single decision can save them thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on the situation. We work with all the spectrum from really low to really, really high wealth, if you will. It doesn't really matter, it's about the complexity. But you make a significant impact on someone's life. And the best part, aside from the money aspect of helping people financially, it's about helping them find their voice and saying, now no one's ever going to harm someone again. And they actually gain the confidence to speak to people in the appropriate way so they don't actually get hurt going forward.
That's amazing. And that's so in line to what I do as a divorce coach, is helping people rediscover their voice. Because so often people reach this difficult space of divorce, having been in a relationship where they've been muffled, and they may not even realize it until it's too late. And so how do we, lift off the layers so they can reclaim that identity?
Exactly. Right.
Go
We
on.
recently were discussing a situation where that's an issue for someone. And we were talking about working with this person, but they're unfortunately going down a path they have a belief system. Beliefs, obviously, beliefs and mindsets that clearly control this process. If you believe someone's going to help you, but they don't have a process in place, then where are you at, right? And
Right.
there's a whole bunch of issues could go behind that. But this particular person has a strong belief system or believes they can get an outcome, but with our collective experience, we know that it's actually not going to result in the outcome this person wishes.
Right. Well, because part of that belief system is that she actually believes that she can't get an outcome, right? She actually believes that she doesn't deserve help or she's not entitled to it, and that she has certain rules she has to follow over which she has no control. And what we try to do is open people's minds to just shift, a slight mindset shift to say, yes, you're allowed to get help, and you can get help from lots of different people. That's what it means to have a team.
And I fully agree. And every life matters. Every child needs a good mom and a good dad.
Mm-hmm.
And every life matters. And the essence of our work, although yes, it's numerically driven, the three major lanes, legal, financial, and emotional. I'll explain that in a second a little more, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. Um, the essence of our work is buried in the stories. It's like, what happened? And then we make numbers out of that. We figure out, we don't make them up, but we ask her, we need this, that, and this. How does that work? So people, they need two major things. They need one, someone to be able to tell their story. And two, they need to say, this makes sense to me, so they can actually sign the dotted line. But in order to get there, you need to ask 110 questions to actually get those answers clear.
Because I think one of the most significant things that you just laid out is you need someone, they need someone to tell their story, but they also need someone to tell their story too. And so often they feel like they are not heard. They don't know how to share the story in a way that will be received by the people who need to receive it. And that you're there as the comforting financial guy who wants to hear the story. And it's not only about the numbers, it's about the person. Because as you said just a few minutes ago, every person matters, every life matters. So you have value, whether you are believing a story that says you don't have value or not. We are here to share. Of course, you have value, and your value entitles you to the help you need.
Exactly. And the other part that's important is there's a language of divorce. Like, how do you talk this language? It's you don't learn until you have to, right? And so we kind of both educate people on saying, don't say this and don't do that, or do this and do that. Don't send that text kind of thing, especially if it's too long, or an email. Or if you have an attorney, how do you set your attorney up for success? So what do you need to, how do you connect those dots? It's really important to be able to understand those, how to bridge those things. Otherwise, you can just talk and talk and talk. And we both have those clients, right, which we respect, but we try to net it down to say, what's the essence of this? How do we actually build a case around this? If it's single-sided representation, assuming if it's not, it's fine. But so how do you build a case to actually make the impact?
Yeah. And when you say build the case, you're not talking about building the case for litigation. You're saying building the case for results, right?
Exactly.
Building the
Right.
case for results, because we want to stay out of litigation, because
Right.
that's where you're going to lose your money in the
Right.
litigation process.
That's right.
So yes, you do have rights and you're entitled to things, but you can communicate that in a way. And actually, Larry, you're the architect of designing that story, right? Or that blueprint to get the clients what they need.
Right. So we talk about our role falls into two spots, and one primary, but I'd say two spots. We call it divorce by design. You take control. We work with the one or both parties together, right? We keep I mentioned before, legal, financial, emotional lanes clear. And I'll explain that again in a second. I haven't explained that yet. Then the other role, besides divorce by design, which we're basically unraveling their lives and restructuring it all for their future so they can be successful. And the other one is called divorce risk management. It's like, how do you manage the risks for what you can't see? So we bring up those 110 questions, if you will, and there's a lot more than that usually. That says, what about this? What about that? I'll give you a quick example. I'm working with someone right now who's working with both the husband and the wife. And the husband has a business and he actually has the technical issue, but I'll share quickly that he has something on his balance sheet that's an eyesore. It causes a lot of problems for him. And the CPA unfortunately did this for him. And it's like, how do you fix this? And so it's going to have a lot of ramifications on his divorce process as well as the business valuation. So we identify these things that there's a process to get this fixed. How do we do that? Can I just share the legal, financial, emotional lane?
Go right ahead.
So in divorce, there's typically three lanes: legal issues, if you will. What are your complexities in your life around legal issues? What are your complexities around financial, that's in context of divorce, as well as emotional? What I've found over time, and I've actually proven out, is that the financial and emotional are the heavy hitters, if you will. That's where the real big stuff happens. The legal, if you have a lot of legal suits outstanding, aside from the the divorce filing, if you will, you have child custody issues, parenting, and domestic violence, then yes, you have some legal issues. But most people, the parenting, they can work out pretty relatively easily. Domestic violence, hopefully, is really on the low end. It's usually we don't see it a lot. And then the legal suits, they're really not a lot there either. So you do need court intervention potentially if things aren't getting done. So use the attorneys surgically. 95%, believe it or not, is financial. So we keep emotional off the side, and we tell people if you want emotional stuff or you want legal stuff, go to the right people of the frameworks. Lisa, you have the frameworks for emotional, and so all due respect, don't come to us. We can try and help, but we're going to refer them to you because we don't deal with that every day. So we don't sharpen that saw. We have a roadmap we call a divorce roadmap that, believe it or not, 32% of the entire possible roadmap you can go through is what's your critical path. The rest is usually irrelevant. So you don't have to go through 68% of the process, and 95% of it's financial.
So wait, okay. So you've said a whole lot so far. So when you say 32% is what is critical and 68% is something else.
We call it a supplementary track.
Okay.
And so if you don't have this, such as, let's just take subpoenas or depositions, those are supplementary tracks that really don't have to go down those paths if you work on your communication, right? And you have stronger communication. So you can get the information differently, but you'll spend a lot of time, money on a process that won't necessarily result in what you want.
Right. So what you advocate for is getting the support you need from the right professionals who are going to help you resolve issues that will get you the most bang for your buck. If I, to just coin a phrase, right? So if you're looking for communication tools, how do I get my spouse, my soon-to-be ex-spouse, to produce such and such documents? Maybe you talk to a divorce coach and work with them to help you learn how to communicate in a way that it can be received, and to help them recognize that both parties will benefit from transparent disclosure much more than hiding and trying to shift the process so that it's unfair, right? Like the fairness aspect, especially when there are children involved. So if the financial aspect can be viewed in a fairness way between the parties, not because court doesn't give anyone emotional justice, which is a sort of dream or a myth that people think they're going to get. If I have my day in court, I will get emotional justice. But that's not what really is going to happen, because courts aren't interested in the time or in fault. This is primarily no fault divorce world. So that's really not part of the story because the court doesn't want to hear it. Whereas you and me and other professionals in our lanes, we need the story. You are important to us. You, our client. And so we're going to hold on to your story and help you process what's happened and where you want to go. So
let's talk about that for a second. What happens if you don't get your story told? What happens is you live with that. It's stuck in your throat the rest of your life. And so we talk about the quality of the process matters. It has an impact, a significant impact on your life. So if you choose to outsource a decision, I'll explain about the sideways megaphone in a second, to outsource the decision to a third party and don't keep in that quarterback role, then you'll get a result that's based on a formula, if you will. And you're like, that doesn't necessarily apply to me, this simple formula for my state. And that's not really how it should go either. There's a lot of issues over the last 20 years of doing this. So there's a lot of issues everybody has, and they all want them kind of reconstituted or addressed in this process. And so you don't want that to be like, that's what I ended up with. You want to say like, I was listened to, it was technically addressed, and now I ended up in a fair and equitable position. And it doesn't, if you're in a community property state, it still needs to be fair, if you will. So community property is another topic outside the scope of this discussion, but it still has to be fair and equitable, however you look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And fair is a funky word, right?
It is.
Because
Yeah.
fair is like weighted with a lot of emotional intensity. And
Right.
and when I talk to people about divorce, I talk actually about four lanes, because there's the legal, the financial, the emotional, and the social lane, which impacts the
Right.
emotional, because your status in your social community changes dramatically when you're divorced, because
Right.
you're no longer part of a couple. Your society has been that up until now. So now you have to redefine where you fit. So that's part of the emotions, but it's not directly related to what got you here. It's what's going to get you forward. So
You bring up an interesting point there on the social, but I'm going to go in a slightly different direction if I can.
okay.
We use a phrase called the complexity factor.
Okay.
People don't know how complex their divorce is or going to be through the process. And we rate it 0 to 100, if you will, on a scale across numerous factors. Relatively easy to do once you have the framework in place. But then, given that complexity factor, if someone self-assess, they heard this program, they self-assess and say, I think I'm right here. And it's not necessarily based on, hey, you have a simple business kind of thing. It's about your unknowns and your concerns. That if you don't know, then the complexity rises. Why? Because you're trying to get to this makes sense to me concepts like it's on the dotted line we talked about before. Once you know your complexity factor, you want to go into a divorce readiness rating and say, how ready are you to address this complexity? If you jump into a process such as the legal process without having those defined, or you jump, like we would have a divorce roadmap next, if you jump into a process without knowing those two pieces, you're setting yourself up for not really for success. And you're also expecting, as we share with a lot of people, in all due respect to the attorney to play the legal person, the financial person, and the emotional, as well as the social lane, if you will, but make sure that all those lanes are being played by one person. And most people are not trained in all those three areas. So you really have to make sure you have without duplicating, but surgically apply it where your issues are. And I would also say keep the emotional person, the emotional professional always in play, because they're going to be critical to your success.
Yeah. And what's really significant there is so often the client has failed to get that emotional support throughout. So they don't necessarily appreciate how much that support is necessary to then bolster the other two, the financial and the legal. But on that note, we're at 18 minutes. So we're going to take a quick break for 30 seconds to have a word from our sponsors. So back with you. And we're back. Right. It's very catchy, that little melody, right?
That was nice. Yeah.
I always like bop to it when in between. But all right, moving ahead. I like to sort of view things with the Simon Sinek model. So Simon Sinek is a TED Talk expert. He has a podcast, A Bit of Optimism, and he focuses on, starting from why. And then he moves from the why you go to the what are you actually doing? And then finally the how. So I'd love for us to sort of take what we've spoken about so far and
Sure.
and start with why. So what I've heard you say is that your why was you got into this 23 years ago because you were exposed to a divorce case and you recognized that the system was broken. There was no outline. What could have been more specific and directed just was sort of like an amorphous blob, and everyone did it their own way. So did I catch that right, or how can you flesh that out more? Your why?
So you are on target. There's another piece to it that comes to mind for me though, is that what I didn't realize 23 years ago, and first of all, I had two blind spots that I recognized 23 years ago, and I filled them big time since that time. But it's something else as well. And the two blind spots were architecture and analytics, and it's really
Okay.
important. Um, but then the other couple things are divorce accounting. Believe it or not, that is different from regular accounting. So I had to teach myself how to do divorce accounting. I already had a bazillion years behind me, right, doing accounting. I'm like, why is this different? How is this different? And the reason is because I won't go into the technical details, but as a settlement date, you want to actually know. Most people take the settlement date and take, say, your fidelity statement and just allocate 50-50, et cetera. But you're really looking at a span of time, premarital, date of separation, date of divorce filing, and settlement date, maybe a couple other things in between, as well as post-divorce. You got to take that, all the life experiences actually technically measure out to 110 years old to actually make sure you're managing risk. So it very, very much focused on managing risk. So when I saw that, I'm like, oh my God, there's a whole space here that's not even being addressed. And unfortunately, people have not developed this. But we did. We built all the missing frameworks. Didn't expect to be doing that, but it's all technically driven, and it's all like much of it, but not all of it happens automatically as we enter the stuff in the frameworks. But there's a lot to it, and so when as an architect, I got more and more interested in how to architect this truly this space that needs to be evolved.
Yeah, yeah. So what I just heard you say like makes me think that your accounting for divorce is actually, actuarial, right? Because you're looking at the long range process, like what's going to happen in the future to 110 years, right? Where very often people at the end of divorce, like, okay, this is what I got now, and I guess I'll have to figure it out for the rest of my life.
Right. So hence the name divorce outcomes, right? We're focused on outcomes. So believe it, and I had to learn this as well. In the process, I haven't found somebody, unfortunately, who's technically a student of designing settlement structures. So we figured out how to do it at a technical level. And so now, believe it or not, if your settlement structure is not done properly, it could decimate your future life, your future financial life. So we talk about future financial life 1, 2, 3. We don't usually go to 4, and usually stay at 1 and 2. But we can tell you when you're going to run out of money or where you're going to be later on with reasonable certainty. And so, by the way, about fair and equitable, you got to be fair and reasonable expectations, right? You can't just you can't have unreasonable expectations. So it's really important because if you tweak the settlement structure or the market shifts, you can actually determine how's it going to result across a bunch of metrics. One of them being retirement stability, among so many of them, and saying I want to measure that, and where am I going to be at the future? And maybe if it's a short-term marriage, obviously you're not going to go out as long, but you'll have different. You can still go out as long, but you have different measurement bands. If you go, how often do you measure? But you want to make sure you can manage that. So how do we design that? How do you, if you're doing single-side representation, legitimately and appropriately, how do you create leverage if you're getting quote unquote hurt in the process? How do you kind of reestablish your negotiating position? So we became masters of that, but it's beyond the numbers. We use numbers as our friend beyond the numbers, but you want to be measuring. And then when the numbers speak to us, we say, oh, this is what we're supposed to be saying. And this is how we're supposed to be, quote unquote, negotiating or at least communicating, but call it negotiation, but truly communication. Like we right size people's mindsets saying this isn't necessarily the right way to think about this because of these reasons. Were you aware of the implications? No, I wasn't. Okay, well, let me tell you what the implication is going to be based on X, Y, and Z.
So what do you do, you know, what do you do when your clients hear your explanations or what their expectations should be and they freak out? Like that just either really depresses them or like the emotional impact of actually the reality test of what the future will look like. How do you deal with that?
So there's two things really. I got constraints and also optimization. I'll do the optimization first. We don't tell clients what the outcome is going to be until we know it's solid. So we have another framework that we had mentioned called an outcomes navigator. And so we'll measure the objectives of each party. We take both stakeholders into account, not just one. To the extent we can have information, we can't. We have to kind of guess a little bit on the story and saying, I think this person has this and stuff like that. But usually we have a lot of information. So we look at the outcomes navigator and we grade it. And we can't grade something high without knowing that that topic is baked into the frameworks. So when we get to, believe it or not, if you get an 88% grade, that's too low for us. We want to get to a 92 to 94% range to say, I know this is it. So then when we finally deliver our solution, if you will, because we have a problem trying to untether to a solution being what's the financial settlement structure going to look like. When we deliver that solution, we can give one solution or many, utopias many, because we want to show what's kind of not realistic. We show a lot of them and saying, here, this is the only way to skin the cat. And where else are you going to go with this? So now they can get to a kind of set of boundaries and stopping point to say, okay, I can't really look at this any other way. So now, and we graded these and we say, here, this one's 78, this one's 92. And both perspectives, and you can see it, they're going to get to what's called satisfactory and happy, right? That's when the meeting of the minds happen, if you will, if you can even do that. But satisfactory and happy is when you actually know that this is when I should close.
Yeah. Woo. So it's a lot of information. And part of, while you're explaining it, it's sometimes hard to take in all the information at once, right? Like, and for you, you are fluent in this, right?
Yes.
But your clients are not. And that's one of the main struggles that people have in divorce. Like, they are not experts. They hopefully are going to experts, but we need to communicate with our experts so that, I don't want to look like I understand what's happening if I really don't. So how do you, work with clients who do a lot of nodding and saying, okay, I get it, but maybe they're not quite 100%.
We have to sign off on documents to make sure we're approving things. But besides that, believe it or not, most people we work with know their lives.
Okay.
They know their financial lives, they live it. And we say, okay, so, what's your grocery bill, whatever, the really simple example, right? If you're going into anything technical, stock options, pensions, you name it, business valuations, the list goes on, real estate, address all those too. And we'll break it all down for them so they actually understand it in layman's terms because we'll ask that next question. We'll get that confirmation. We'll have them rearticulate to us. That's a really critical process. If you can't rearticulate to us what we just said, then you can't really understand it, right? You have to be able to rearticulate that. And when that happens, what happens in the process? What happens is the client becomes dangerous, right? The client becomes stronger negotiator around these topics. So we like to share a lot with the clients because this way it's not only in our heads, but it's in theirs too. So when an issue comes up, they can say, no, 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 or yes, 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 yes. They have to know with confidence on what they're doing and how it's being handled.
So in this way, you're helping them actually balance what they're willing to trade off with what they really need to keep. So by helping educate them and getting them to rearticulate it back, you're helping them gain the clarity that they may have thought they had, but until they articulate it's not in their words, it's not in their mouths. So
Right.
they need that power. And so what you offer is a really empowering tool by using the financial universe as a space in which to empower people who may have felt like they never had power in the financial space before. They know a lot of other stuff about their life, but even though you've shared that, well, you're really the expert, you really know your stuff, but so many people come to us and they're like, I have no clue and I don't know where to start. So the space between where they show up with you and where you're offering potential scenarios is quite wide.
Yes, and let me explain that further too. So why do people not really know, you know, what's right and wrong here, right? It's due to lack of frameworks. Okay.
Okay, frameworks. Tell us more.
Yep. So you have mental frameworks you share with people and to go through the emotional lane, if you will. We have financial frameworks that we build. Well, it's all structured, but we need to customize data, if you will, to go through that. And we design it so we can see it, and we show those frameworks to people when we're working with them. They start to build that knowledge-based understanding, and they get it very quickly. Say, oh, I understand. And then when we finally get to the seven instructions, they say, what's a good deal, a good seven instruction, a bad seven instruction? So we let them know, like, this is through the grading process, and we explain it, saying, here's what's good and here's what's not so good. And if it's not so good, how do we improve that? How do we close the gap? And I'm going to call it, based on that topic I talked about before, about the constraints. So we try and optimize the outcome to balance all the metrics, if you will. But the constraint, someone has an issue, and we say, great, okay, bring it on. We'll capture that, and not a problem. But then what's that mean in terms of numbers? So let's figure out, where do we get that data? Do you have evidence to support that? If you don't have evidence, can your spouse at least agree to that? And that'd be at least better than not having anything at all. And then we start to add that into the mix, and we impact or impose pressure on those profiles. And as a result, we can see how much pressure we're having on this and how do we arrive at something a little better.
Wow. I mean, that sort of is mind-blowing, but at the same time is really clear. But sometimes getting the clarity is shocking, right? Like, because people think that they'll never have clarity. It's very much, all or nothing, or he'll never agree to that, or she's not going to do X. So that's a piece that, as we're getting close to the end of our interview today, maybe there's something that we can take on to a part two of this conversation. But one thing I did want to touch on before we left was the idea of architect. And, I hear a lot of language about blueprints, which is the plan, and laying out the plan and creating the blueprint is essential to actually building a process. I often call it scaffolding. I want my clients to have the scaffolding so they feel supported when they move forward. But you're talking about architect. So tell me a little bit more about what it means to you to be the architect of these plans.
It's great. I haven't explained that to too many people, actually, but it's just inherent in me, if you will. When you have a really strong background in financial matters, like I do, accounting, tax, etc., and I want to actually accent the point. It's forensic business valuation. The list goes on for me. It's many times you don't actually have to start with accounting or tax. Start with finance. It's like, how is these transactions handled? Case in point, real quick, I have a case in California. We work remotely across the country. Case in California where certain transactions between her and her spouse were mishandled. And so she didn't understand it. We had to look at it and say, here's what I think was handled. And she said, that matched up with my story. That's what I'm thinking about. But we see it at a different level, right? So we can actually put it, kind of give a layup for the attorney or for ourselves or for the client. And so you start to unravel the onion and figure out, what pieces can I touch? What pieces can I not touch? How do I improve the position? And it becomes a big puzzle. You're like, okay, here's the architecture is basically knowing you have a puzzle piece that you can actually work with. Many people don't know there are lots of puzzle pieces. And if you have a puzzle piece, how do I design this puzzle? And so I can get to an outcome, and then make sure that outcome is measurable, but not only from me, myself, and I being spouse one's perspective, but also spouse two, so that we can increase the likelihood to come to an agreement.
Yes. And I really love that imagery. I have shifted from puzzle language to Lego imagery, because,
Right. Sure.
right? Like a puzzle, you take the same pieces, but it comes to the same thing. But with Legos, you can take the same pieces and then add a few new ones in, and then build a totally different design that is going to support you going forward. So
Right.
that's what I see when I hear you talk architect.
Can I share one more thing?
Yeah.
So believe it or not, your personal balance sheet, it's called a marital estate, is, I'm going to say, relatively high, probably 95, 98% of the time, incomplete. What you see on the surface, your fidelity statements, your bank statements, 401k, et cetera, that's what people grab because they're reportable events, right? They're easy to grab, but the unreportable events are really critical to make sure you have a full comprehensive marital estate. Why is that important? Is because it's going to drive your entire settlement structure. Aside from your income and spending profile, it's going to drive your entire settlement structure. So you've got to work hard on that piece, which tends to be one of the harder pieces of this design process, the architecture process. But when you know the story, you're like, okay, I can start picking up numbers here. Some are very simple, obviously, but some are more involved. And you're like, I'm starting to build this profile out, and now I know I got to the end of the story here.
Great. I'm thinking wow in my head because there is just so much. But let's take a stop here, and we will continue the conversation talking about building that architecture, finding the story underneath the story, and where those numbers lie, recognizing that there are numbers there where you might have thought maybe there weren't. So thank you so much for sharing what you've shared so far. Larry, tell my client, my audience, where can they find you?
My email is larry.smith@divorceoutcomes with an S on the end.com. And if you want to reach me by cell or text, feel free, 617-680-5222.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Larry. And for my audience, you can find me at lisa@lzlcoaching.com or go to my website, lzlcoaching.com, and you can schedule a 30-minute free discovery session. So I look forward to more conversation with you, Larry. And to my audience, I will see you next week.